Let's jump to you, Elizabeth. Again, given your experience in compliance and policy enforcement, how can financial institutions ensure that adoption of LLMs genuinely strengthens compliance without inadvertently introducing new regulatory vulnerabilities?
Yeah. So this is a very interesting question, especially when you're looking at it from a program level. I think most of this is really about designing and defining a proper governance framework. So what we're seeing a lot of institutions do now is implement, adopt what's called an AI risk committee. So there's lots of other committees, typically in an AML or financial crime program, but we're seeing these being added to oversee the different AI projects that institutions are looking at implementing, the development of these projects, the deployment of any kind of software, either built internally or purchased through a vendor, and then kind of managing that ongoing monitoring and testing when they've decided on technology and they've gone about implementing it. It's also really about clearly defining roles and responsibilities. So I think this is a big one to really understand who's doing what, and who's responsible for what. This is obviously something that the regulators look for as well. So you want to make sure that these are in writing. They're easy to share. Both internally and externally. So all your internal stakeholders are very well aware of roles and responsibilities, but also those external stakeholders, primarily regulators. Policies and procedures sounds very basic, but absolutely another key element of appropriate governance and risk management. And you want these policies and procedures obviously to be in writing and to really cover a variety of things. So everything from model governance, how the models are retrained and on what cycles. Incident response is another big area. Explainability requirements. Janet mentioned explainability and data. All of that really needs to be well laid out in policies and procedures and well documented. And then I think broadly, you need to stay on top of what your regulators are comfortable with and what they require. Again, I think Janet mentioned this. It's kind of all over the board. I think it varies across jurisdictions, but even within jurisdictions, there's a lot of variation. We've seen some states take some action. We haven't really seen anything in the U.S. at a federal level yet. So you really need to understand what your specific regulators require, and then also what they're comfortable with. And that might sometimes require engagement with them, right? Being very transparent with them and helping them along the learning curve as well. Talking about data obviously is very foundational to all of this. So data integrity and lineage is very key. So you want to ensure a level of confidence in your data integrity and your data lineage, reliability around these data sets that are in particular are used for training, but also once these things are put into operations, you want to make sure you understand that lineage. You want to test for bias. This is one of those areas where we've seen several states start to legislate, particularly around bias and anywhere that AI is being used that could potentially present bias into the equation. Robust lineage tracking, right? So everything we think about with these projects and not only how AI works, but the outputs of AI, it's really about tracking. So I'll probably say that. You'll probably get sick of hearing me say that in these next few minutes. But tracking is just so important. And again, very key to demonstrate to regulators. But I think it's also because, you're not just trying to convince your regulators, but I think you're trying to help them learn as you go along, right? Because their primary responsibility is not to understand AI, even though it's becoming such a big part of how we do this work, how institutions operate and how they do compliance work, that the regulators are having to start becoming a little bit more experts on this stuff than they otherwise would have thought, in the older days. But it's really not their central role. So I think part of it is really trying to help them understand, but also use all of this tracking and all of this documentation to really enhance the confidence they have in these products, how they can be risk managed, and the outputs from them. To that point, of course, model transparency and explainability. We always hear a lot about this whenever we talk about AI, but it's just so important. to understand, what your models are being used for, that they're auditable, that they're explainable. What are the model inputs? What are the training data sources? What's the overall path to that output? Really looking at every sort of piece of that process and ensuring that it's not only transparent to you, the entity that's looking at bringing on this technology, but again, all of those different internal and external key stakeholders. And then it's also critical to deliver that response if there's any scrutiny, right? So when you're under the gun, that's the last situation you want to be in, where you're sort of frantically trying to explain this stuff and create that transparency with the regulators. So when those situations pop up, you're under regulatory scrutiny or there's some kind of regulatory inquiry, you want to be ready to be able to share this stuff and explain exactly what you're doing and how your software and your solutions are working. Human oversight. This is another key area. So, obviously there's lots of different use cases and reasons to use AI to make things more efficient, right? Doing things very quickly that humans might take a long time to do. But I think there has to be a balance between, the right mix of technology and humans, and where you introduce the human into the loop of any of these processes that you might be using AI for. And sometimes that proper level of balance can be different depending on how you're using the AI, what it's being used for, the level of risk around that sort of use case. So this is all things to keep in mind as you're looking at, either embarking on an AI journey or you're even still in the midst of it and you're looking at ironing out those wrinkles as you start to confront them throughout that journey. Um, Tests and pilots are another component of this, right? You want to test, test, test. Sometimes that requires a pilot even before you bring on this technology. But testing is critical. Sandbox environments where this stuff is isolated are going to provide you sort of that safety to know that you're properly testing without any interference with sort of your day-to-day operations that are currently in process. But also this can help identify and control issues, again, as Jenna mentioned, around hallucinations, missed risks, and a lot of other issues that can come up as you start to implement this type of AI. Um, I think it's also just important to stay close to your vendor. So you really want to get a sense of their philosophy around, their product development, especially as it pertains to things like explainability, responsible AI, how transparent they are with you. I think it's really important to sort of feel comfortable with your vendor, not just in terms of the sophistication of their products, but are they dedicated to kind of sort of following you through the journey and supporting you with everything you need throughout that implementation journey, but then also during the life cycle of using that technology. They can often help you identify issues and how to solve for them, and they can also help with communication to stakeholders. And this is a really key area, because as I said, regulators are really still learning about this stuff. They're still, and not only at the exam level, but also sort of how to craft regulation, um, to not constrain too much what institutions are able to do and how they're able to use this technology, but also keeping in mind things like bias and other safety issues and other risks that can pop up by using this type of technology. So engage early and often, help them get comfortable with not only how you're using it, um, the sort of generative AI, how you're using it. There's lots of different use cases. I don't know if we'll get into that today, but there's lots and lots of different use cases for how to use generative AI throughout a financial institution, but also within a compliance function. So you want to, be very kind of clear in how you're using it, the benefits and risks of those applications, and then, obviously how you're going about managing those risks. This can also, it's really not just about sort of making sure that you're able to use this technology, but if there's enough communication, again, especially since they're still learning and still looking at how to craft the right legislation and regulation, engaging with the regulators and really being transparent with them can help pave the way for potentially positive regulatory steps. Positive meaning beneficial to the financial institutions sort of segment, how these entities want to use this without being hamstrung by potentially regulation that's either, sort of miscrafted or, potentially crafted in such a way that it's too restrictive. I think this engagement with regulators can help maybe offer sort of a certain level of understanding that can help that ultimately what the regulation looks like actually be better and potentially more friendly to, what these institutions seek to do with this type of AI. And many vendors will partner with you. So I think that's the other thing that I want to emphasize. I know we at SymphonyAI, we really appreciate being able to partner with our customers to talk to their regulators and even internal stakeholders, boards of directors, things like that, where sort of situational awareness is very important. Socialization of sort of what's going on, how you're looking at using this, what the value, the derived value is going to look like, how that can help change the institution, but also, more broadly, I think we need to look at it from an industry level, right? As the industry, as this sort of AI gets more prevalent across the industry, there's obviously going to be different types of value derived when a broader swath of the industry is using this type of technology and learning from it and getting more efficient with it. So I think there's also that sort of layer to why you want to work with the regulators and why you want your vendor to potentially participate in that kind of engagement with you. So that's where I will leave it there.
That's fantastic. I also reckon we can enter into the use cases debate here because there is a lot to say around that. And I love how you highlighted the role of the vendors and the key relationship and accountability and shared responsibility, of course, that they might have.